Hello?
Hello, this is Margaret.
Hey, Margaret, my video's not working here. I don't know why.
Okay.
I'm using my phone.
Okay.
Oh, this thing's terrible, man.
Yeah, mine is not as well, Margaret. This is Chairperson Hinkins.
Okay, let me check on settings.
I think that's everybody. I don't see anybody's face in the windows.
I'm checking on it, just bear with me. There we go.
There
I
we
think
go.
we've got you.
Working.
Lots of little boxes. Sometimes I miss one.
Good evening, Margaret. Just testing to see if you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise, Margaret, this is Terrence. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Are we all testing? This is Susanna.
I can hear you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Roberts, and I can hear you just fine.
Thank you.
Hi, Margaret. This is Joel. Do you need another few minutes to figure out what's going on with the cameras, or should we go ahead and start without them at 6 o'clock?
Can you not start your camera? I see that a few people have been able to start theirs.
I'm unable to start mine. This is Commissioner Fipp, and I was going to log out and back in.
Okay.
Same here.
And Margaret, I don't see anyone's face.
Me either.
Me either.
I don't see anybody's face.
Yes, same here.
I see several people, not all, but some.
Yeah, I can see everybody that has camera that's working.
Hmm.
I'm going to log out and back in and see if that resolves it and let you know.
Me too.
Yeah, I can see most. I can see a lot of people.
Right. I'll do the same thing.
Let's see. Yeah. I don't know what's going on. Why wouldn't they be able to?
Do we have a max amount that can be on camera at any time? Is that maybe the problem?
That should not be the problem, no.
Okay.
Okay, that seems to have worked for me. Is there any council person or planning commissioner that is still having trouble with the camera at this time?
Doesn't appear that Commissioner Roberts is back yet.
Thank you. We'll wait for Commissioner Roberts.
I've just admitted her back into the meeting.
Margaret, have we confirmed that the public can see all of us?
I have not. Let me unmute our Public Works Director and see if he can see us okay. Mickey, are you there? Can you see everybody's face on the video stream?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
I still cannot see Commissioner Roberts. Am I the only one that can't see her?
It looked like she logged off again.
Oh.
Mayor, it appears that Commissioner Roberts was in as an attendee, not a panelist, and before she got promoted, she was logged off. So hopefully she'll log back in shortly.
Oh, I see her now. Just a minute. I think we've got everybody in.
Yeah. Oh, finally.
There she is.
Okay. Okay, thank you for waiting.
Okay, so at this time, we will call to order the Wednesday, February 17th, 2021 City Council and Planning Commission Joint Workshop. And at this time, we will call roll call for City Council as well as Planning Commission.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Here.
Councilmember Meyer?
Here.
Councilmember Rary?
Here.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez? Vice Mayor Rodriguez?
Here? You don't hear me, Margaret?
No, I do now, thank you. Mayor Bryant?
Oh, okay.
Here.
And for the Planning Commissioner, Vice Chair Cross? Vice Chair Cross?
On mute. Oh, there you go.
I see her on. Vice Chair Cross, can you hear me okay? I'll move along to Commissioner Phippen.
Present.
Commissioner Roberts.
Present.
Commissioner Ziegler.
Present.
Chair Hankins.
Present.
And Vice Chair Cross, can you hear us okay? Are you able to? I see that she's unmuted, but I'm just not hearing anything from her end. Everybody.
Is there a way for?
Go ahead.
Okay, if there is a way to work with Commissioner Cross to get her working, that would be great. I can see her, so we do have a quorum, so we will move forward. And if she has more difficulty, just let us know, and we'll try to work with her to make sure she can have participation in the rest of the meeting. But at this time, we will open. Well, prior to public comments, I would like to ask the Assistant City Manager, Grindall, to provide an outline of the zoning ordinance update and what is being considered tonight. So, Terrence, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council and Planning Commission. Although I think after my remarks, I think you do want to do your roll call of both bodies, but unless I missed that, just wanted to briefly indicate what we're doing here tonight is to go over major policy issues having to do with the zoning ordinance update. There's no particular decision directly that we're looking at this point. We want to raise, the staff and consultant want to raise some issues that might be of some controversy, so that we can get your input on which direction to go in, and then we'll be bringing those issues into a actual draft zoning ordinance that we'll be bringing to you in two pieces, because it's long, in the future. And when the ordinance comes to you, the policy direction that you give us tonight will be reflected. I do want to address one issue that's been somewhat controversial in the community. There was an appendix to the policy issue paper that listed a number of people that were interviewed to get their input on sort of the workings of the zoning ordinance. I want to be very clear that what's recommended to you by staff tonight is by staff and by our consultant, that although we got input from various folks about how the ordinance is working and how it needs to be fixed, these policy issues are issues that have arisen from council discussion as well as staff's own professional judgment that we're bringing forward to this point. So I wanted to make you aware of that, so that and also for the community. So if they have comments, that we can shape them in that direction. So I hope that's clear. I'm happy to answer questions about that if the council and commission are interested. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So at this time, then, Terrence, are you done with the overview that you intended?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So then at this time, we will open public comments. And I'll turn it to you, Margaret.
At this time, the public is permitted to address the City Council and Planning Commission on items that are on the agenda. I received one written public comment with this item, and the City Council and Planning Commission has been provided copies of the written public comment, and it will be made available on the City Council webpage. If you wish to speak under public comment, please raise your hand using the WebEx feature, and I will call your name if provided and unmute you to speak. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per person, and your microphone will be muted after the timer has expired. While we encourage your comments, state law prevents the City Council and Planning Commission from discussing items that are not on their meeting agenda, and if appropriate, they will have staff follow up on them. And I have quite a few hands raised. I will go ahead and start with Danny Dorman, who will be followed by Rod Floor. Mr. Dorman, I'm unmuting you now. Go ahead.
Thank you. Excuse me, and good evening, all. I wasn't sure how I was going to address this body. My first thought was the quote from the document, but at least one of you knew what was in the document, this 10-hour clandestine zoning code update policy issue paper in advance. A member of this council actively participated in this confidential, let's keep it quiet so that we can really tell you, developers telling our city, what we feel we need. And I'm talking about, yes, Johnny, I don't know, Rodriguez. I say I didn't know because it seems every time he gets his hands caught in the cookie jar or misses a meeting that's beneficial to his district, such as the pot farm, that's his go-to response. I didn't know. This time, though, I don't know just can't cut it. He either went as a representative of the council, therefore is obligated to say what he heard, or he went as a private citizen. Oh, wait, private citizens weren't invited. Only developers and their proxies. So I'm only going to ask 6 questions, and I demand that someone answers. Either the city manager, the zoning parties, you unelected decision makers, or any of you of the council. My first question, what was your role in this, Vice Mayor Rodriguez? Second question, who commissioned this exercise? Third question, when was this commission authorized? Fourth question, why was it kept confidential? And I mean the real reason, not that half-baked excuse that's hidden in the document. The fifth question is a 2-part question. Why is it called a zoning code update? Updated from what? And then my final question. Since Sino and Nunn didn't participate, was that planned so that this travesty could slip under the citizens' radar? This is something that Vice Mayor Rodriguez should be able to answer, because he was part of this confidential consortium. And I would like to keep the remainder of my time silent so that everyone can think about this. I'll say thank you at the end.
The speaker's time is up. The next speaker is Rod Floor, followed by Carolina Villaseca. Mr. Floor, go ahead.
Thank you, Margaret. Again, forgive me if I ramble. I don't have a speech written tonight. I just had time to scribble down a few notes because I had almost no time to read this. It was put out 24 hours in advance. My understanding is special meetings with 24-hour advance notice are for emergencies. Under the Brown Act, I'd have seen no emergency here. This thing was written in January. I'd like to know whose problem we're trying to solve here. If it's to help the people in the city, why are the people not invited to participate? I didn't see anybody I knew on that list of 17 or so participants. If there's a public benefit, where are the people? This report, as I read it, spread a lot of sunshine. But what little substance was there painted a much cloudier picture. There were a lot of subjective terms, minor, adjustable, blah, blah, blah. But what they really come down to is reducing accountability and removing our elected officials and our appointed officials from much of the process. I don't know, there's something in there about auto approval of what they call minor exceptions. Again, very subjective. And it just looks like it's just changing the code. Well, you can automatically approve a 10% reduction in setback. Well, that just changes the setback, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it at the end of the day. If they know they can get it, they'll just ask for it and get it. There's a reason why we have these things. And changing them under whatever auspice, whether you call it an adjustment or you just come out and honestly call it a change, it doesn't make any difference. You're changing it. I don't think it's acceptable at all to just do away with the design review subcommittee. There's a reason why we have a planning commission. Things need to be reviewed. We understand that this can make it more difficult for a developer to come forward because they're going to try and get as much as they want, so they don't know if they're going to get it all. And that's their fault. That's on them. Again, whose problem are we trying to solve for here? I just want to say, if this policy had been in effect at the time, the Goodwill project would have been passed. We would have a Goodwill sitting on Armstrong right now. There would be a light industrial operation going on in what was purportedly a retail warehouse. And I can just tell you that I know Joel Bryant voted for that even after, I was at the meeting, even after he heard why that was not legal. He still voted for it, and now he's the mayor. And now you're talking about giving him and his buddies carte blanche to do whatever they want without concern for the people. It was the people that put the stop to that. It was Karen Rary doing the research on it. It was our public officials doing their due diligence. And this paper allows for none of that. So I really object to it. And I certainly hope you won't be making any motions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carolina, followed by Cinziana. Carolina, go ahead.
Good evening. I also read through the presentation, and my thoughts are as follows. We already have problems with builders not following the plans that they submit to the Planning Commission based on the materials that they're supposed to use, based on the design they're supposed to follow, and we already don't have enough teeth in the city government to go back at the builders and enforce the plans that they submit. So why would we lessen code, making it easier for them not to do what they say they're going to do? As we saw with the Amber Park Apartments, they submitted Plan 1, then they sat on it for a year, then they submitted Plan 2 that had over 45 changes, which is a ridiculous amount. And who knows what they're actually going to build in Brentwood, in that apartment complex. We're going to have to wait and see. And then what recourse will the city of Brentwood have when they don't even use the materials that are submitted in the second round of changes? So in my mind, we don't need to make it easier for builders to build craptastic projects in our city. What we need to do is the opposite. For the last 20% that we have to build out is make sure that the builders stick to the plans that they have said that they're going to stick to. Let's keep the zoning the way it is right now, because we still want businesses to have land to build on. We still want companies that have jobs, that are salaried with benefit jobs, not part-time retail jobs, to come to Brentwood to help with traffic and help keep our people here so we can maximize our revenue from the stores that we have here. So that's my 2 cents. I just don't see a point to this update the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can remind all of the speakers that have already spoken to put their hands down, and I'm going to check in really quickly to make sure, see if Planning Commissioner Cross can hear us and communicate with us. Are you able to speak? I see that she's unmuted, but I'm still unable to hear.
She should be able to switch audio and use her phone. I've had to do that before. That might work. On the bottom of your WebEx where it says mute, unmute.
If not, I'll email her the phone number to call in as well. I'll move on to the next speaker now, Cinziana Todor. Cinziana, go ahead.
Thank you, Margaret, and good evening, everyone. I will probably be rambling here because we just received this report 24 hours ago, and we all have full-time jobs, and time is very limited to actually go through this paper. And on top of that, what I want to mention, it's kind of frustrating that we don't get to hear, as the public, we don't get to hear any presentation on this, or at least some cliff notes from the staff and so on, to have an idea what really this report is. But from what I see and understand, everything that it's air codes recommended does not benefit the residents in any way, just the developers. That's how I see it. There is a common theme that I see throughout the paper, trying to weaken our checks and balances, controls around our established processes that, by the way, were just fine to build Brentwood up to 80% according to the general plan. And what I see in addition to that is that we're trying to put more power in the hands of city staff while diminishing the role of the Planning Commission and possibly City Council having a saying in the decision maker and as far as reviewing and approving development projects. And who remembers the City Council meeting back in late 2019 when Mayor Bryan said that we should make it easy for developers to build in Brentwood and let them know what's coming up. This report is doing exactly that, opening the gates for developers to fast-track their projects without any scrutiny. And that leads me to my next point. The people interviewed during the process, all of them, represent some special interest group within real estate development, real estate investments, etc. It would have been nice to, in the name of transparency, to see titles and companies the panel members work for. I understand professionals needed to be consulted, but why not interview professionals who do not have any vested interest in projects around Brentwood? Maybe in that case, we would have had more faith in the changes recommended in the report. And what changes, from what to what, it's very unclear. All of which we see as very general statements. And why regular residents who were trying to build their family home or maybe their private business spot in the city were not interviewed? One of my neighbors has been trying for the last 2 years to obtain permits, everything necessary for him to break ground for his family home and their dream home. And they're not there yet. But yet, he doesn't have the financial power of a C&O Tekken and Associates, LLC, or GBN to hire a consultant to fast-track the process. Also, before the council even considers accepting this report as basis for changes to Brentwood.
The speaker's time was up. I'll move on to Antonio Xavier. Antonio, go ahead.
Hi.
My name is Antonio Xavier, and I am a Brentwood resident, not a developer, a resident. I would like to start by saying the cartoon on page 5 is completely inappropriate. This is a paper paid for by the city of Brentwood. The end of the zoning review process is not a jackpot cash payoff. That may be how a developer views things, but that is not how a Brentwood resident views this issue. Why is this paper placing the desires of developers above the interests and protections of the citizens of Brentwood? Zoning exists to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the people as it relates to land use. Zoning does not exist to provide easy and stress-free projects for developers to reach their jackpot. After reading this paper, I understand there are general complaints about the process, and I see a series of recommendations. However, the paper absolutely failed to identify the actual problems that need fixing. At this point, I am not convinced we need to take the drastic step of creating a minor use permit and removing decision-making authority from the Planning Commission. What kind of urgent issues is the city of Brentwood trying to fix with this zoning change that are not currently being resolved? Does the Planning Commission need to meet more frequently or have an expedited option created for simple issues? I honestly have no idea because the paper does not sufficiently identify or explain the problem we are trying to solve. It seems the paper is asking for a serious change in the zoning review process without proper justification. From the outside looking in, the proposed change removes transparency from the process and weakens the checks and balances of our current system. I am therefore against the proposed minor use permit process laid out in the paper. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. There's no additional speakers with their hands up at this time. And if I could have those speakers that already spoke unraise their hand. We have no additional speakers.
I apologize, Margaret. My sound just muted for just a moment, went out for a moment. Are there any further speakers? No further speakers.
There were no additional speakers, no.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened up here. Seeing that there are no further speakers, at this time we will close public comments and move into item 3, discussion of and City Council Direction 2, staff regarding zoning policy issues. And I'll turn it to you, Assistant City Manager Grindall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the Planning Commissions and City Council. The update of the zoning ordinance is something that's been in process for some years. It was a strategic initiative put forward 4 years ago, it's now actually 5 years ago, and it's up to this time, staff hadn't been able to bring it forward. Our zoning ordinance is antiquated and includes provisions that would not hold up under new state laws if invoked. So the process here was to create a legally defensible zoning ordinance that provided the city the tools that they needed to address some of the challenges that we were facing. In particular, there were questions about the concentration of uses. The council brought issues forward about how many gas stations were appropriate in a certain area, how many car washes in a certain area, and in general, we've been concerned about certain areas having an inappropriate concentration of uses for a vibrant commercial economy. In addition, we've been challenged dealing with non-conforming uses As you know, there are certain non-conforming uses that continue on, creating a noxious environment for the neighborhood, and our code didn't provide the tools that staff needs to working with the policymakers to end uses that are creating nuisances for neighborhoods. So and at the same time, the non-conforming use provisions are sort of it's sort of a one-size-fits-all. So a relatively minor impact from a non-conforming use is treated the same way as something more dramatic. So that has an impact on neighborhoods. So what's proposed is to have tools for allowing benign non-conforming uses to move forward, but to be able to amortize and end any noxious non-conforming uses. There are proposals for modernizing and streamlining the development process, and the idea of that is to have minor issues that are not significant, that are compatible with the general plan and the zoning ordinance, be moving faster to encourage commercial development. However, and frankly, allowing the Planning Commission and the City Council to focus on the larger issues that are having a larger impact, particularly issues where the zoning code is proposed to be changed. Certainly, I want to address that there's nothing nefarious or secretive about this process. There were no secret interviews. The proposals that are in front of you that the consultant's going to be going over are based on the city staff's interpretation of what the council was concerned about, and also our professional recommendations about how to have a more streamlined and effective zoning ordinance process. So I wanted to give that assurance. And with that, what I want to do is hand this over to our consultant. Actually, let me answer any questions on that point, on those points first, without going into detail, because our consultants will be able to go into detail. But if there's any comments on those points, I'm happy to answer them now.
Commissioner Roberts.
Members and commissioners would like to have questions. If you could raise your hand so that we can take them in order. That way, no one is missed.
I can wait for Commissioner Roberts. That's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. I didn't see the hand.
It's all right. No worries.
I apologize. Sorry. I have some concerns. I have a concern because I'm also a resident in the city of Brentwood, and I did just get this document myself. And although I'm a quick reader and perhaps a quick study, in all fairness, and we're trying to be fair in this process, the process has to be trusted, not just amongst the council and commission, but the residents, and that's who we serve. At the end of the day, they have to be given notification. And a 24-hour notification, frankly, is not enough time to get the complete participation. So I have to say that I'm disappointed that it did not come sooner. Did not come in time for folks to have time to read this document, but in fact, within 24 hours. The other thing that I would put out there, in doing this review and approval, I'm just trying to figure out who all was on the board or who all was involved in putting this document together. And the reason I'm asking that, when you want buy-in, when you're looking for buy-in, you actually have to include some of the residents in the buy-in, and you didn't. And that, I understand. The few people that did participate, they're few because it didn't get out in time. But more than that, you can't put documents like this together without considering the residents and their participation. And frankly, I don't see where that has happened. I'm not saying that it's not something that we don't need for clarification, but what I am saying is that this being presented the way it is without that type of participation and the timing of this, I think it does a disservice I will say that it does a disservice. And so it's just a comment. There are no questions here, but I want to be clear that we could have done this a little differently. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment. This was done in January, and I'm not understanding why we couldn't let residents know about it. If you look around Brentwood, residents are your number one landowners. They own the majority of the land. They should have the loudest voice in anything that we do. Secondly, we're doing this because we were prompted to do it by state legislation, if I'm not mistaken. So my question is, what in this document is minimum requirement by state legislation, and what part are we doing because someone wants to do it? Because I don't want to take away anything from any commission that we have. I actually want more checks and balances. I mean, if you know me, you know that. Like, I want more checks and balances down the road. I don't want to take away any. And I think someone mentioned the document is very wishy-washy. Like, if we're going to do something because it's state mandated, then let's make it crystal clear so there is no, 10%, like 90%. Like, let's just make it crystal clear. What are the minimum qualifications that we have to do to meet the state regulation? And that's what we should do. We should do nothing more than that to benefit developers. We should do everything in our power to benefit the people that have already invested in our town and live here right now. And I mean, that's kind of it right now. We can, if there's anything else we want to talk about, we can talk about that.
Councilmember Rary?
Yes, Terrence, if you could tell me how the people who did participate in it, how they were selected. I think that was a question that was brought up by a resident. How were they selected? And I know that in the past, when a council member has been part of it, we've been a stakeholder, and all of us have been part of it, not just a person. So I'm wondering how it was selected. And then after that, I've got another question.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to answer that question at this point, yes. I apologize for the confusion, but this document was produced by staff, a group of planners and our consultant to develop this. The consultant did interview a range of stakeholders to find out what their issues were, but this document is not in response to their concerns. It's in response to staff's concerns and the council's concerns. So there was no committee, there was no discussion, there was no drafting by anyone else. The planning staff, along with legal staff and input from economic development staff and others, are the ones who drafted this conceptual document that lays out some concepts and the points that were made bring home how important it is to hear out from the council and the planning commission which direction you want to go. And there are always trade-offs. That's why we're bringing it to this at this very early stage. There's no approval planned. There's no approval on the agenda tonight. It's a very early concept for which direction we go in drafting the document, which will then be made available to the entire community to go over with a fine-tooth comb.
Okay, so that brings me up to the next question, and hopefully it will be answered in the presentation, but this to me seems very, very high level, and it doesn't get into the nuts and bolts of what we're actually going to be doing. Is the presentation going to be going over the timeline of how things will be done and other public hearings for the residents?
Not very much, so I'm happy to do that now for you. The presentation is going to be going over these concepts that are decision points that we're looking for from the community. So, sorry, from this project. So, but let me amplify what happens with the zoning ordinance update. based on direction that we received today, we're going to be drafting, we're actually already drafting, but we're going to be drafting a zoning ordinance in two parts. One are the regulations about uses, and the other is about administrative procedures. And then we will be publishing that document. That will be a detailed document that will include a strike-through line out from the existing zoning code to the future, and will show exactly what is being proposed to change. And then that would be presented after lots of public comment, be presented to the city, to the Planning Commission and the City Council for their update and comments. Those comments would be integrated. The two parts would be put together. That process also occurs for the other level, which are the use regulations. Those comments are all put together in a complete document and presented to the City Council and Planning Commission and then City Council for approval. So that's the process that's used. Very transparent, very open. Tonight is just to get you're exactly right, Councilmember Rary. It is a high-level look at this.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I would echo what the others have said so far. I'd like to request that when we take the next step on this, when we next present to the public, that for the sake of transparency, we're much more clear on who every participant was as far as the interviewees, what their positions and businesses are, why they were selected. I think I could see that there was a nonprofit leader in there. I'd like to see that, but I also would have liked to see some small business representatives, and again, like we talked about, some residents. And thank you, Terrence, for explaining the process for that. But for the sake of buy-in and for the sake of transparency, we do need to have those things on there. We, again, need to have longer than 24 hours for our residents to be able to read through this, formulate their questions, and truly understand what they're reading. But I would also like to know, when we keep talking about the state mandates that prompted this updated form or document, I think we need to be very clear about what those state mandates are. There should be a section in this document that explains what specifically we are addressing and how we are going to address each of these mandates and what it's going to do to make us in compliance of these mandates. I believe I will have more comments later, but that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ziegler.
Thank you. Normally I'm pretty quiet during these types of meetings and trying to just absorb as much as possible, but I have to say I need to echo a few comments that others have already stated. And I'm trying to understand, we as a body or we as a group tonight are supposed to help give direction to the city to continue and further this and to solidify this a little bit more. I'm a full-time business owner. I can tell you, yes, I read through this, but to be able to articulate well-thought-out points in less than 24 hours, I can look you straight in the face and say, I can't do that. I've been on the Planning Commission for many years, so I have a lot of experience, but at the same time, I think to get the type of feedback that you're looking for to go in the direction, maybe I'm misspeaking, but I too echo, I wish we would have had some more time to review this in advance, to be able to formulate thoughts, to be able to put things in writing, to have questions. I know we haven't heard from the folks yet that developed this presentation, but I just wanted to put that out there that in the future I think there needs to be more time. Again, we all, we do get a small stipend for this, and that's not why we do it for sure, but we all mostly have jobs as well. So I think in fairness, we do need to have a little bit more time in advance of this. So I don't want to, continue on that rant, but I'd like to see that in the future, please.
Thank you.
Mayor
Are there any
Bryant,
more?
If I
Yes.
may, I have Vice Chair Cross on a phone line, and I'm unable to move her over to the participant, so I'd just like to unmute her now in case she has something she'd like to add.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Vice Chair Cross. Are you able to speak now?
I don't know. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. You know, honestly, I don't have a lot to add to what our council people and Commissioner Ziegler have already said. I have to say that one thing that I tend to be really good at is processing a lot of information very quickly, but really to feed off of what Commissioner Ziegler brought up is I work full time. I've got kids at school that I'm pretending to, you know, be a teacher to. Being able to get as deep into the document as I would have liked to be able to absorb it and revisit it with questions and maybe be able to clarify things on my own, the amount of time was just impossible. And don't get me wrong, I spent a lot of time with it, but I do think that for something as big or as scaled as large as this, even though I think we've got great staff, the city of Brentwood has great staff, and so it's not me doubting, you know, the caliber, the quality of the work is, but just being able to process this much information and be able to do something productive with it, it would have been nice to have, you know, 3 or 4 days to be able to digest, revisit, ask questions before we were brought up. And I think that's it. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other council members or commissioners that would like to have clarifying questions or statements to staff? And if not, at this time, then
I have a quick question, Joe, okay. Mayor. I also want to echo what everybody said. I think that it would have been nice to have more time, but I also want to make it clear in hearing, because I feel like obviously somebody said I participated in the meeting. So, Terrence, was there actual committees that were put in place with council members and people of the community? And I think I heard you say this was pretty much put together by staff and outside consultants. Am I correct on that, Terrence?
That is correct. It was 100% put together by staff and outside consultants.
Yeah, because I know that somebody had stated in public comment that I was part of a committee or a meeting, and I was trying to think back what meeting I was involved in, but I couldn't remember one. But I appreciate that. But I also echo what everybody is saying, that the amount of time to really absorb what's on here is very difficult. I'm also a father too, and I've worked full time as well, so it was a lot. But it's not saying that we don't trust our staff, but I do know that it would have been a lot better for us to be able to have this ahead of time so we could ask all the questions that we needed to ask, even prior to the meeting. So I'd just like to echo that, and then also get clear from Terrence in regards to this committee. So thank you.
Thank you, and certainly I hear you loud and clear. No decision is needed tonight. I would recommend that you hear from the consultant, get her presentation. We can reschedule another meeting in a few weeks where we can discuss this further. We want to get this done as soon as possible, but no sooner than that. So we'll take the time it takes. There's nothing that's going to be rushing you, but I would recommend that you hear from the consultant's description of some of these major policy issues, and then we can bring back to you a chance to discuss it after you've had a chance to absorb her presentation and read the document. So if that's okay, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to hand it over to Martha Miller from Miller Planning Associates to walk us through these key policy issues that we're wrestling with right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before we continue, can we get everybody to mute their mics, because there's feedback that's coming back because we have too many open mics. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Ray. Okay, at this time we'll receive the presentation from the person presenting it.
Great. Thank you.
Martha Miller. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you. Martha Miller with Miller Planning Associates. And thank you very much. And I'm happy to be here working with the city on the zoning code update and really starting to work through all the kind of issues. So I do have a short presentation where I'll give an overview of the project, kind of an introduction to zoning and the zoning code update. And then the idea was for each policy issue that we're looking for input on, I'd introduce the issue, kind of summarize our recommended approach and get your input. So the plan was to go one by one, introduce the issue and recommendation, discuss and move on to the next. We can start with that. If you'd rather have me do all at once, I can do that too. It's really just whatever works best for you. But the project is a comprehensive update to the city's zoning code, which is Title 17 of your municipal code. And the goal is to create a concise and user-friendly set of regulations that really implements the community's vision that's expressed in the general plan. So the general plan really lays out the community's vision for the future, and the zoning code is one of the tools to make sure that as development comes forward, it is consistent with that vision. So when staff in the city put out, this effort, the objectives, there are a number of objectives within, and it's to update the zoning code so that it does reflect the values of the Brentwood community. It's updated, it's modern, it is consistent with these state, federal, local laws, as well as professional best practices, that it's consistent with your general plan, responds to community concerns. It updates and streamlines the development review process, providing that clear direction of what's expected and what the process is. It's written to be easy to use and understand by all parties, whether you use the code on a daily basis, like your staff, or whether you just use the code one time or another. And overall, also including illustrations, graphics, and tables to really help with implementation. So I brought this slide up when, excuse me, Terrence was talking about the process, just to really illustrate. We are really in the beginning of the process. Zoning codes it's technical, it's regulation. Your zoning code is very long, one of the longest that I've worked with. So it does take time for us to really understand kind of and assess where you are currently, what your existing development patterns are, what your general plan says that you want to be in the future, and what the regulations say today. And think about, how well those are all really working together and how well your zoning code does serve that implementation of your general plan. So we're kind of at that phase where in doing that research and assessment and talking to staff, there were some questions that arose that before we get further into the drafting of the regulations, we wanted some policy input just to make sure we're on the right path as far as the approach we're taking. So from here, we draft the regulations, and we draft these in collaboration with staff, and we do it in chunks. So as Terrence described, we kind of break it down into discrete, kind of related sets of regulation to help facilitate review. So we take these forward for review, for input, and then we revise them, and then we put them together into a complete code. We put them together. We take them forward for review and input again. We revise them again, and then it's after that we go through that the formal review and adoption process. And that process is really designed to kind of build on direction, to listen and respond. So we always want to hear as much as we can as early in the process as possible, but at the same time, it's an iterative process. So there isn't, as Terrence says, there's no decision being made tonight. We want to get input. There is time still after this, if people think of things later, to provide that input in. So it is an iterative process. But again, we just want to hear whatever we can as early in the process as possible, but it's not just kind of a one-time thing. So what is zoning? When I talk about zoning, zoning is that body of regulations that establish what can be built on a property, how it can be used, and what that review process is that's required. By law, it's required to be consistent with your general plan. So that general plan really sets out the marching orders for the code update, because that general plan establishes that vision, that plan for the future of the community, And then the zoning answers the where, what, and how of land use. So as development comes forward, where can certain uses be located? What are the standards for the design and the development, the siting of development? And then the how, what is that required procedure for review? So in my mind, I really think about zoning as being a good neighbor, and it's really intended to set those regulations, again, that as that development comes forward, it works to implement the community's vision for the future in a way that really minimizes the adverse effects that, that buildings or use of one property really have on another. So it's to encourage those optimal development patterns, at the same time minimizing the effects of it. And so we do think about all the different users of the code and how it works for them, how it works at the front counter, what different users are looking for. And at the risk of very gross oversimplification, but really just kind of trying to wrap our heads around it, we think about, applicants, whether that's a developer or, somebody just building a house or doing addition. All applicants want to know what the rules are, what the timelines are, if there's any flexibility, how do the neighbors' concerns, how are they addressed through the process? Design professionals want to know the rules as well, but they may be looking at, where's that flexibility if I have a unique design solution? Is there any consideration of that, or is there no flexibility in it at all? Staff, of course, the clear rules as well, what the process is, but also what's that vehicle for community input and how to balance that certainty and that flexibility. Residents want to know what's going to happen in the community or on adjacent properties. So having those clear standards and those clear review processes are important as well as to business owners, what the rules are and how long, when do you get a final answer to make some business decisions based on that. And it really is about finding the right balance, thinking about what the costs are, what is the benefit, balancing how much regulation is enough to make sure that the community is realized, but at the same time having the least amount of regulation to get the job done. And it really is a balance, and that's the balance as we go through with all of these discussions related to this. We're looking to find what the right balance is for Brentwood, because every community, it's different. Again, through our initial review and our discussions with staff, we have a couple of items that we'd like to get your feedback on. And these are big ideas. So we are still up here where we'll be working out the details as we go along, but we want to get initial thoughts and reactions and things that we need to be aware of as we kind of move forward. So they're discussed in the paper, and I'll give an overview of the findings and the conclusions, what we think of a recommended approaches, and then have some discussion. So the first set of recommendations really are around development review and approval. And so the administrative procedures in a zoning code really establish those procedures for which the city achieves the general plan goals and policies. So when you have the clear, predictable procedures, those can help promote that desired development and foster transparency in the process. So everybody knows what the process is that a development application is going to go through. So when these processes are vague or confusing, they're frustrating to developers. They're also frustrating to community members. And it also hinders the city's ability to attract the type of investment that they want to attract. So when we look at the review procedures, we typically look for certainty in the process, on the one hand, as well as flexibility if there's to meet individual project needs. So there's a couple of ways that we recommend that Brentwood incorporate these kind of principles into the review process. And the first is to establish a new review process, and this is the minor use permit process. And this is one for projects that, you want discretionary review over. You want the ability to add conditions. You want the ability for that project to be appealed to the Planning Commission or the City Council. You want to provide public notice of it, and you want to give the opportunity for public input on a case-by-case basis. But they don't always necessitate a full public hearing before the Planning Commission. So these might be the type of projects that you think, okay, 95% of the time they're totally appropriate. But sometimes there might be a concern, and maybe in a certain area or just maybe something about that project may be a concern, that particular proposal. So rather than subject every project to that full level of review, there may be some projects that there's still discretionary review, there's still public notice, and there is a hearing before the Planning Commission if it gets appealed to the Planning Commission or the City Council. So, and this could be used, this is a tool, and then through looking at the use regulations, when we start, detailing that in, the city can decide when to apply that tool. So it might be in some cases, there might be some projects that currently go to the Planning Commission and you say, God, why do we see this project? We see so many of these and we always approve them with the same conditions. Well, those you might say, okay, well, maybe these could be in my new use permit. But there might also be other projects that maybe currently now don't have discretionary review, that currently don't go to the Planning Commission, but you think, for the most part, those were fine except that one. Remember that one that really caused problems. Well, you can apply this tool to that, again, so you're not subjecting everything to hearing before the Planning Commission outright. There's that opportunity. You get public notice, and then there's an opportunity for it to go to the Planning Commission and the City Council, as well as for the city to apply conditions. The second part of this recommendation is really looking at the design review process. So design review is conducted to verify compliance with design standards and any applicable design guidelines. And the concept behind this recommendation is to have design review conducted by that same body that reviews the project for compliance with all other requirements, and that the design review is conducted concurrently. So that review body is looking at the whole of the project. And it's not, well, you're just looking at uses and you're looking at design. Whatever review body is looking at the whole of the project. So that would mean that projects that are decided by the director or that planning staff acting for the director conducts the design review. Those that go to the Planning Commission conducts the design review. So related to the design review, with the code update, there's really an opportunity to integrate more use and development-specific standards into the code. So these can be things that staff or the Planning Commission usually ask of applicants, conditions that are regularly applied, or sometimes just best practices. And there were questions about, state law and where does this come in? So this is a general approach that we recommend, is to incorporate these standards into the code. But in some cases, in some instances, you're actually required to for certain housing development. So there's some recent state laws that require certain housing developments to be subject only to objective standards that are known ahead of time. So we're required to do this for certain housing developments, but the concept is also good practice in general because those clear objective standards provide the clarity and certainty, both for developers as they come in, they know what's expected of them, but also for the community members so that they know what standards that development needs to be held to. So integrating those more standards in also sometimes can help you feel more confident in administrative approval, that those things that you typically applied as conditions of approval, move those into the code, make them required just as a baseline, and then there may be opportunity for more administrative approval. Again, and you can weigh that as we go through the update of the regulations. And then coupled with this is including a process for consideration of alternative solutions. So when you have those objective standards, which would really be kind of strict or as strict as reasonable, as strict as you decide to have them, but provide an opportunity then for someone to make the case if they have an alternative design solution. So it's a little bit different thinking than what we have now with typical waivers or variances where we think, oh, there's something wrong with the project and that they don't want to meet the standard. It's a little different than that. It's like we set these standards and we've really kind of crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. But if somebody has something that they want to propose as an alternative design solution, it would be a process to consider that. Again, the kind of details of where that flexibility comes in is something that happens through the conversation as we draft the regulations, but it's a concept that we recommend incorporating in with this code update. So that is our recommendations on the concept related to development review and approval, and I'll pass it back to Terrence to see if there was anything that I missed that should be covered in that.
No, just if the council has any council and commission have any early comments on this, I would want to amplify how important it is that we develop objective standards that are quantified, that comply with state law, but as Martha indicated, also provide certainty to property owners and the community of what to expect from projects. So that's gonna make our whole process a lot more transparent. And actually, that's not a place where we have a lot of flexibility. We are required for housing projects to have objectives, to make our standards more objective. But I'd be happy to hear from the council or commission if there's any issues on this part of the discussion paper.
I do have several hands. Let's begin with Councilmember Mendoza.
Sorry. I believe you started the presentation saying that this needs to reflect the values of Brentwood. And I think we've come to find out that one of the things that Brentwood values is the participation in the process. And I don't want to, it sounds like there's a lot of taking away, and I said this before, a lot of taking away of the checks and balances. So I wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward with a project that does that, like the minor use permit, the one body doing both two reviews at once. Like, I like having different people as part of the process. The more people that look at a project, I think the better. Like, hey, you missed this, you didn't think about this, or you know what, are you sure you're interpreting the code right? It looks like it got handed to us and something looks wrong. So that makes me uncomfortable. And, the alternative solutions, like on one hand, I hear you're saying you want it to be very clear and very strict, but then there's like this areas that it waffles. So is there any way that when we're doing this, again, what are the minimum requirements by the state? And when you're giving us an update, say this is a nice to have or this is a required to have. And I think it would be clear for us and then for the residents also, like, hey, there's no way getting around this. Like, we have to do it. The design review process, I think that that's something that's going to be legally required. Like, we have to have all the requirements in place. Is that correct? Like what we are demanding for when it comes to design?
That is correct. We have to have objective standards.
So so does the planning department get together and say, from now on commercial, we don't want to see asphalt shingles. We only want concrete tile. Like, does it have to be that specific?
Yes, but it's actually part of the code. So it would actually be the planning commission and the city council that would make that determination staff would enforce that code. And by definition, those are codes that aren't subjective. So there's a certain type of tile rather than nice-looking tile, right?
Yes.
And the flexibility that is talked about here is a way to improve the project. If there's a design solution that makes it even better, that's what the flexibility comes in. So the objective standards are very strict, and if applied strictly, might generate sort of uniform buildings, not enough interest or variety. And then if the city wants to, it allows them to be, it allows some flexibility. But the flexibility is in the benefit of the city, not in the benefit of the developer.
Can the flexibility be, when you design the code, can you do it almost like a dollar menu, like this, or this, so they can choose from like a couple? Or does that, or you only have to give them one option?
The objective standard needs to be a very clear objective standard. However, the areas of flexibility could easily be a menu or a point system, absolutely. And that's actually, we're getting down into the weeds, but that actually is something we're envisioning. But first and foremost, we have to have a clear objective standard that indicates what is the minimum requirement at least, and then the city can ask for more. And through that menu or scoring system, absolutely, that's something we could look at.
And just again, I really needs to be clear to me what is state mandated and what is a nice to have, because from what I'm hearing, some of the nice to haves are not what I feel comfortable with. So that's it.
We can certainly do that. By the way, I'll go ahead and answer that. We'll certainly indicate which changes are being proposed that are state mandated and which ones are staff's recommendation. But we can certainly do that.
Commissioner Roberts. So,
sorry, Commissioner.
I'm sorry.
There's actually several hands in front of you. You are.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Go ahead.
We'll go to Councilmember Rary next.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Well, first off, the minor use permit, I can see where that it is very subjective, and that is a concern that how it is to be used. I have seen a previous project that needed to change the depth of their columns to prevent the homeless from congregating between their columns. And in order to change the depth of those columns, they did have to go back into a planning commission meeting, even though it wasn't that much of a change, it was a change. And so in that case, a minor use permit process would have been nice to have versus having to take it back to the entire full commission for that minor change. So I can see why it could be used for that. I still have some concerns of how it will be used, and it's just so subjective. Also, what changed? There was a comment in the document about being able to deny a project outright. What would constitute allowing a project to be denied outright instead of having to make them go through the process? I know that in the past, residents have said, why can't you just deny that? And so can you explain how we can deny a project without giving them their due process?
Great question. The way you can deny a project is if you have clear objective standards and you say this project doesn't meet these standards, or is clearly, at least in staff's opinion, not consistent with the general plan or the zoning ordinance. Therefore, staff can recommend denial. So, and that's the philosophy that I'm advocating in this process. that a project that doesn't meet the standards would be recommended for denial. It doesn't take away the due process of the applicant. The applicant has a right to be heard by the Planning Commission and the City Council if they don't agree with staff's recommendation. However, it is faster in a way because staff can make it clear. And of course, in reality, if we have clear guidelines and the document is clear, in most cases, they're going to see, oh, I can only build 2 stories here, so I'm not even going to bother to submit a 3-story project, right? That's a dramatic example, but a clear code will actually discourage project applications that are not consistent with the community's vision.
Okay, and could you continue, or a conditional use permit? Getting away from that, I know that there's a business next to a restaurant that their overflow, their parking is done in the restaurant's parking lot versus their own or across the street at another parking because they don't provide the parking. And I know I asked that could we review their conditional use permit so that maybe we can, make it so that they can be enforced. And there was no conditional use permit on that property. So if we're eliminating the conditional use permit, what is our, how do we enforce things when we have a business that's being a bad neighbor?
Great question. First of all, the conditional use permit would not be eliminated. It would still be in place for uses as envisioned. The minor use permit would largely be applied to uses that are presently permitted by right, but we want to be able to look at adding conditions to it, not so much taking projects that now require a conditional use permit and making them minor use permits. It's actually going to be mostly increasing the strictness of the code. And the reason for that is actually your example is well stated, because if it requires a minor use permit, we can address issues like parking that can be solved with a condition without subjecting the project to a months-long process. Staff could work with the developer, with the property owners, and come up with a solution. And of course, if everybody's happy with the outcome, then that goes forward. If anybody, either another property owner or the Planning Commission or the City Council, wants to take another look at it, there's a public process to do that. So that's what's envisioned here, is actually to apply a stricter standard, but do it in a way that doesn't impede the property development. And I'm sorry if I go on too long, but wanted to be clear.
And the oversaturation of businesses, how do we prevent that from happening through code, through our zoning code?
I believe that is next on the agenda for as an issue that we're going to talk about. But yes, a minor use permit is key to that process.
Okay, so there's more of the presentation than just this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm done.
But you will hear about concentration of uses in just a few moments.
The next speaker is Commissioner Ziegler.
Thank you very much. Similar to Councilperson Rary, I guess for the minor use permit, I heard what you just said. I think some of my questions were answered, but there still seems to be ambiguity in that process and who kind of manages. It's like a judgment call by one person or a single body, or is it multiple people? I'm still a little bit not too sure about that. And then one of the other comments, we talked about design-specific standards. I can say in the last 4 to 6 years in the Planning Commission, we've seen developers come in that basically says they want the city to basically adopt their design standards. I've seen projects get approved that way. I disagree with that personally, but so are you saying that if we came up with these design-specific standards, this would eliminate that potential happening again in the future?
Well, it's hard to say eliminate, sir, because it is up. The Planning Commission and the City Council could do something different in the future. They could change the regulations, but it would certainly reduce the likelihood of those kinds of things happening, because you would already have your design standards that you've vetted that you can apply. So, and frankly, we're also working with the consultant is actually going to be working to make sure those standards are not economically infeasible from the get-go. So we'll already know that these standards can work. And so it's going to be highly unlikely. I can't dictate what future planning commissions and city council members will do despite the regulations. All these regulations can always be changed. But I don't think that was your question exactly. It would discourage that kind of activity. There would be city-developed standards that would be applied.
Okay. I'll wait with more questions. Thank you.
No.
Commissioner Hankins?
Thank you. Regarding the minor use permit, you've started answering some of my questions, and with Commissioner Ziegler and Councilperson Rary. Is there going to be kind of a size determination? Are these projects going to be something that's not a full apartment complex, or is it going to be just a office use, tenant improvement? What are we looking at as far as what we are going to allow as a minor use permit, I guess is my question.
Certainly. A minor use permit would be something that it addresses what it says, the use of the property, not so much the design. So the design has its own process. Now, the objective standards do have to be applied, and we do have pressure from the state that we have to set up objective standards that if those are met, we have to approve the project. That's state law. It's not about our zoning code. That's about that's about that requirement. And it's a by right development. So we do need to do that, but that has nothing to do with the minor use permit. The minor use permit would be, for example, if the city council were to decide that there were too many car washes in the city, and that car washes would be subject to a minor use permit that had a distance requirement or a concentration requirement as a part of it. So the car wash wouldn't necessarily be slowed by a long process, but they might be, but they would be restricted based on a minor use permit. So it would be more about use than an actual constructed building.
We'd have more say then as far as, like you said, density of specific projects. They would be more spread around the city because we have this minor use for that particular zone? That's
correct. So if there was a concern of there being too many of a particular kind of use, a particular services use in a particular shopping center, that it ought to be spread around, and that's a concern of mine from an economic development point of view. We should have more vibrant centers that are a mixture of uses, and there are some centers that go a little in one direction or another. So the minor use permit gives us the tool to address that, and it would be a staff level recommendation. It would be recommended at our staff level review committee. It's not a single person, and it would be once that decision was made, it would be made aware of the Planning Commission and the City Council. So you'd be aware of that activity in case you wanted to call it up for a review. So that I wanted to sneak in the answer to Commissioner Ziegler's question as well, if you don't mind. So
good. Oh yeah, please. So forgive me. Yeah. Okay. I guess at this point, there's so many questions as far as this minor use permit, but I think we're getting closer to what we want to hear. So great.
And there will be a lot more detail that comes. We were really just trying to explain the concept.
Yeah, and thank you. Very helpful.
The next speaker is Commissioner Roberts.
Okay, thank you. Well, I agree with my colleague. I think that hearing words like subjective and flexibility are a concern to me. And so if we could just narrow it down to state regulatory minimums where things are spelled out specifically, some kind of flooring, some kind of foundation, and then go from there, we could actually see where you're going with this effort. That's a comment. The preventative measures seem awfully subjective as well. We can just be a little more specific. I think people would be, I know I would be a lot more comfortable. Question. As a planning commissioner, time and time again here of late, we are dealing with approvals that are somehow needing extensions a year or two. And I'm just trying to figure out, in this plan that you have here, are you going to be addressing that? Because what I see happening, folks are on these extensions, we approve these extensions to come back a year later, a year and a half later, sometimes requesting additional extension. And there are changes in their draft, the original approval. So I'm trying to figure out how we're going to address that, because I see that now, I've seen that a few times, and I see that could very well become the new go-to with some of our developers. This minor use permit, you say staff level is going to make the recommendation, but my fear is that where we're moving to minor use, where we're going to start becoming inundated with minor use permits? Because that also can present, is there going to be a limit on this, or is this just something that we're going to standardize so that folks can get their plans approved, provided that there is a minor use permit established? So those are some concerns that I have that maybe somebody can take back and help me understand better.
Certainly, actually, I can address these issues partially right now. Absolutely, there are two types of extensions. One that's granted by state law, and that the city really doesn't have any authority to address, and there are other extensions and time limits that are located in the zoning code. So absolutely, as part of the administrative procedures, we will be tightening up what is an extension and how and whether or not what are the conditions under which an extension can go forward. I've been watching meetings. I understand there are issues about this, so this will be something that's addressed in the administrative procedures. The other comment is that absolutely minor use permits where they're used will have a clear documentation. It's not just a random, we want to have a minor use permit. It will have in the use table, it'll indicate what use requires a minor use permit and under what conditions that minor use permit would be allowed. So it is documented, and that'll be part of the document that the Planning Commission and the City Council will review and ultimately approve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Roberts. Terrence, I do have a couple of questions as well. When we were talking about non-conforming uses, there are a couple that immediately spring to mind. One of them is Gursky Farms, for example. Would the minor use permit be a process that the city would be able to use to move that from a non-conforming use to a permanently conforming use per situation? Some of the zoning that we have currently were didn't really take into full consideration some of the anomalous pieces of property that were, for example, a ranchette estate. These are things that we deliberately zoned. We want that kind of agriculture inside the city limits, and yet some of that is causing some problems, or potentially could, for that to continue to be a use for the owners of that property. So is that something we're going to deal with later, or would that fall under the minor use permit conversation?
It'll fall in two places, but a minor use permit is part of the solution to that problem. As Mr. Mayor, as you indicate, it's one of the confounding parts of our zoning code is that we actually don't have a zone that allows agriculture in Brentwood, which I know, given our history, seems a little odd. We do have a right to farm ordinance, but there isn't any way to actually conduct agriculture without being a legal non-conforming use. That's something we can address, make it a use that requires a minor use permit and has distance requirements and other requirements. So the short answer is yes, it's involved, but then there's another discussion. The third point that the consultant will get to is all about non-conforming uses, and the benign ones like an organic garden and a more intense one like a cement plant.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions of staff, we can move forward for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. Martha?
Okay, so I'll talk about concentration of uses, and then we'll discuss, and then we'll talk about non-conforming and discuss, and then we have home occupation. So the next set of recommendations really relates to that concentration of uses, and there's really kind of two things that we found. So first is that your general plan land use designations, establish that overall policy basis for land use and development. And then the zoning establishes the zones to define those distinct locations for different uses, again, consistent with your general plan. So your general plan land use designations each correspond to a fairly specific type of land use, so residential, commercial, office, industrial. So each of those land use designations in your general plan identify, typical or example uses. But then they also identify these secondary or complementary uses, which makes sense because for a vital or desirable, say, office area, you want to have somewhere maybe to go to lunch, right? So a restaurant can be appropriate. But you don't want so many restaurants that the offices are displaced. So the challenge is to, how to allow these supportive uses or these complementary uses while still ensuring that they don't overrun or displace the intended primary use. The other issue related with concentration is to have a balance of uses throughout the city. And so, there may be in certain areas of the city a concentration of, say, discount stores or check cashing stores. In other cases, there may be uses that the city is required by law to allow for. So you have to allow for them, but you can apply separation requirements so that there's not an over-concentration. So these include things that are actually protected under free speech and other laws, including adult businesses, tattoo parlors are common ones. So they have protections. The city has to allow for them and has to allow a reasonable number of places for them to be able to locate. But you're kind of limited in what you can regulate. You can't prohibit them altogether, but you can apply these separation requirements. So with the concentration of uses, we have a couple of recommendations for that. And the first does relate to that minor use permit process. So requiring a minor use permit for uses other than the core uses of the zone district. So in the professional office zone, you might require a minor use permit for any kind of use that's really not an office-related use. And that, number one, facilitates the establishment of those core uses because those are easier, less process to go through because they're directly in line with your general plan. But it allows for consideration of those complementary uses through a streamlined review process. Because again, like I said, one restaurant might be great and you really want it there, but 20, not so much. So it gives that opportunity to look at those on a case-by-case basis. The other part is to apply the separation requirements for certain uses, and that's really intended to provide that balance of uses throughout the city, allow uses while avoiding that overconcentration. And again, in some cases, by law, the city is required to allow certain uses, but may apply separation requirements. And so you want to introduce those into your code as well. So those are the recommendations related to the concentration of uses that we'd like input and reactions to.
Commissioner Roberts, and then Councilmember Mendoza.
Commissioner Roberts needs to take her hand down. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you. Councilmember Mendoza.
Yeah, I just have a question about secondary uses. When I look at things, I look at residential and then everything else. Do we have to have secondary uses for residential, or can we just leave it like it is? I think our general plan is pretty awesome, so I wouldn't want to change the zoning or substitute it with anything else. So do we have to have secondary uses?
Secondary uses it's not something that's be subject to most residential districts. That might be included in a transit village or something like that as envisioned as part of the Innovation Center, but your traditional residential districts would not have secondary uses. However, we do want to talk about home occupations, which we'll talk about as the last point tonight, but that is different than a secondary use altogether.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Perry.
Yes, the question I have is, you brought up the Innovation Center. I remember when the working group created uses in there, and what was a by right, what was a conditional use permit, and what was prohibited. So when in doing this, can we create something? Are we going to be creating something similar to that, so that that we can say gas stations and car washes are basically prohibited from everywhere, because we've got them everywhere, with the exception of the Sand Creek and the bypass area. That's the only area that we really need anything, and that will help with the people leaving the Innovation Center. Are we going to be doing something like that in creating this, in addition to saying, can't be within 1,000 feet or whatever else the limitations are?
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, absolutely. There'll be a use table, just like you put in the PA1 specific plan. It'll apply citywide. So that absolutely there'll be indications of where each use is allowed at all, with a minor use permit, with a conditional use permit, or permitted by right. So that it'll be a use table with columns, and just like you had in the PA1 specific plan.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Councilmember Mendoza again. Councilmember Meyer.
Terrence, can you clarify, does that mean if a business were to come in and say they want to start a very specific type of business, that we give them the options of where they could locate, as opposed to them saying, I like this area, that's where I want to be?
Absolutely. The one of the clear advantages of having this code, having our zoning code be more transparent and usable, is we can direct people to places where the use is appropriate, rather than them going down the road on a use where the council has already determined it's not a good place for that use. So it'll be very, very clear and transparent. It'll be a map. Ultimately, it'll be a clickable map, so you can click. Someone will be able to go online and click on a property, and it'll tell them what uses are allowed there. And it'll be we think it will reduce the number of attempts to put a round peg in a square hole.
Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
Mayor, I wasn't sure if we should check in with Commissioner Cross and see if she has any comments. I can unmute her.
Yes.
Commissioner Cross, did you want to add anything?
You know what? On this one, I don't. I kind of did on like the last slide, but that's okay. But for this one where we are, I don't have any additional comments. Thank you, though. I appreciate you reaching out.
Commissioner Cross, I can see your name online. If you want to use the raise hand, you should be able to be seen there as well. Okay. Ready to go.
Martha?
Yes. So we'll move on to nonconformity. So nonconformity is something that was in compliance with the zoning regulations at the time it was established, but because of changes to the regulations, it's no longer compliant. So it was legally established, but it doesn't, for whatever reason, meet the current regulations. So the city's current provisions for nonconforming uses allow residential and horticulture, agriculture uses to continue, but they must be removed if that use is ceased for 6 months. And then all other nonconforming uses have termination dates. But in order to really establish those or enforce those termination dates, the city must provide notice ahead of time. And the city hasn't programmatically given notice or required that termination since those provisions were put into place. And I imagine the primary reason is that that's an enormous effort to undertake to identify, notice, and pursue termination of all non-conforming activities throughout the city. There's also the amortization concept, which Terrence kind of talked about earlier, and that is allowing a use to continue for a given period of time over that time which the owner is expected to kind of recoup their investment, but after that use would need to be terminated and go away. So that's a concept that can be incorporated into non-conforming provisions. So in looking at your non-conforming provisions, we have a couple of recommendations, and that is really tied around the recognition that not all non-conforming uses are created equal, that they are very different in kind of their impact that they may have, that there's some that are really benign, they don't have an impact, and in some cases they can even be beneficial. I think about in my single family neighborhood, there's a corner store. It's non-conforming, but it's kind of one of the best things about my neighborhood. But so there's that idea. There's non-conforming uses that don't have an impact, and maybe those can be remain, potentially expand under certain conditions. And then there are those that they're not detrimental to health and safety, but they really aren't in line with that long-term vision of where the community wants to go. So those you might want to limit the expansion, you might want to require the removal if they're abandoned for a certain amount of time, and you can establish whether that's 6 months, 1 year, whatever the city is comfortable with. But once they're abandoned, they need to be removed. And this, and in my experience, seems to be the case with the vast majority of non-conforming uses. They're fine, they can continue, but really ultimately, for the sake of the long-term vision of the community, we'd like them to go away. And then there are those that are detrimental. those that really create impacts, and that amortization provisions really allow the city to require those to be removed within a certain time frame. So that, again, is that tool to incorporate, to be able to use if there is a non-conforming uses that's really creating a health and safety issue or creating impacts. So again, with this, the details get worked out in the drafting of the regulations, but we'd like to get your thoughts on looking at and applying an approach to non-conforming uses that really recognizes that, again, they're not all equal in their impacts. And depending on the level of potential impacts, having the tools in place to treat them differently. So that's the introduction to non-conforming, and I'd like to hear your input or thoughts on that, or Terrence can share anything that I missed regarding that.
Yeah, and Martha, not so much that you missed, is that I'd just like to amplify, in addition to allowing, to sort of understanding the amortization provision, but to actually have a modernized code that would allow our legal advisors to help us to do that properly. Our code now doesn't really provide the tools that we would like. So I want to indicate that.
Commissioner Fitt, and then Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you, Mayor Bryant. So I appreciate that not all are equal in their impacts when it comes to the non-conforming uses. But my question is, how is that determined? What is the process for that? Has that been identified at this point?
It has not. And when this kind of approach is used, it's usually there's usually a categories of uses that are considered by definition to be similar as we have now. Residential is always a non-conforming use, is always benign, right? An existing residential use is a category of use, and then all the other uses are assumed to be in the middle category unless the City Council and Planning Commission take an action to move it into the detrimental use category, and there's a hearing and a process that you go through for that to happen. So as a part of adopting the zoning ordinance, again, and that's not, there's different ways to do it, but as a part of adopting the housing ordinance, the Planning Commission and the City Council would indicate which uses were by category moving into which area, and then if there were, then in going down the road, if there was a particular use that became that the staff or council or commission became aware of a problem, they could go through a hearing process and move it into the detrimental category. I hope that's clear. It doesn't look like I...
You did. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Not at all.
Councilmember Meyer.
Actually, to kind of continue on with what Commissioner Fitzman was talking about, when you're talking about a benign use, say, for example, we'll look at the corner store in the neighborhood or the agricultural store in the neighborhood. It doesn't seem to me like you could say that that's a one-size-fits-all. I mean, one neighborhood is going to have that fit be a little bit more appropriate than another. Is this something that can legally be a case-by-case? And do we also have a current list of these levels of non-conforming usage that are in play right now, and would it impact any of them?
In order to amortize them, they absolutely cannot just be a random one. It has to go through a notification process and a hearing process. When it comes to the other uses, they can be moved into categories by council action by category, or in particular if that was desired. It just gets a little bit burdensome when you're trying to update your zoning ordinance at the same time.
So when you're talking about moving something from one category, benign, to whatever, is that something that can be conditional, or does it have to be a check and balance like that's exactly the same for each use?
Between benign and what is her middle category, but not detrimental, between benign and non-detrimental, it would be by category, but between non-detrimental and detrimental, there's absolutely a case-by-case process.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, this could change over time. So, for example, a fruit stand might now be considered to be in fact, let's go the other way. It might now be considered to be a non-conforming but not detrimental to public safety. Well, in the future, we might see fruit stands as being no problem at all, and they should move by category into the other area. So that future councils may change this over time to adjust to community standards.
And is that based on state mandates where they fall within these categories?
No, it's up to the city. It's the city of Brentwood's decision.
Okay, thank you.
I think she asked, do we have a list of all of the non-conforming that exists right now? Because how big is this issue for us right now?
We actually don't have a list right now of all non-conforming uses.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can we actually?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to. Can we get a list of that just so we know for the future?
We can certainly. I'll look into how much effort it would take to establish that list. But we can certainly get if nothing else, we can get an idea of the scale of the issue. But we'll try to get a listing.
That helps. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Rodriguez, you're muted.
Ellie, I'm sorry. I'm working off my phone because my computer wasn't working today. But going back to, I was basically going to say the same thing what Councilmember Meyer just asked in regards to if we could get a copy or a list of businesses that are not, that are not performing, I guess, in regards to that. But let me ask this too: is this some of the businesses like that are grandfathered in that had certain conditions that now those conditions are not consistent with what we want no more? We have the power to change that?
Yes. The non-conforming uses is the technical term for what we refer to as a grandfathered in use. So the zoning changes on a property. Let's say there was agricultural use on that property. The zoning changed to residential at some point. The agricultural activity can continue for as long as it's done so continuously. So that ag use is grandfathered in.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm asking is because there's a lot of old businesses right on the northeast of Brentwood or more on that side of town, and also, of course, downtown as well. So this would impact those in regards to what the old policies were, where we could actually change those and have them be more accountable for what we're looking at for the future of that area?
Yes.
Okay. All right, John. Thank you.
I also have one more question, Terrence. Can this be moved in the other direction as well? For example, recently we've got a business that I believe is zoned Ranchette Estates called Broken Road Farm. They want to be an agricultural, educational, small facility, but they weren't around when these non-conforming uses were permitted, and yet they're a little outside of what we have the ability to zone for at this time. Would it be able to, if something it falls into that category, something that the community and council and planning commission decide as we want in the community, and so is there a way to move it in that direction as well? Because currently there isn't.
No, absolutely. That would be literally moving it from a non-conforming use into a conforming use within a particular district, and that's certainly possible and something we could look at as part of this process.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands.
Martha, next point. Thank you.
Yep. So the last one is home occupations, which is a topic of conversation in many jurisdictions right now. And most jurisdictions currently have similar home occupation regulations, similar to Brentwood, which limit on-site clients and location of activities. So your current regulations do allow for on-site clients for instructional services and gives an example of music lessons and tutoring, and requires all activities to be located indoors. So some items for consideration for just practice in general, that you could incorporate provisions that allow on-site clients for all home occupations, particularly in light of where we are with COVID restrictions and people working from home more and more. This is likely already to be occurring in certain places. And again, generally working from home has, some work at home right now because of COVID restrictions, but some work may remain home-based post-COVID. The other part is to consider allowing activities to be located outdoors, so accommodating things such as swim instruction or other instruction that is outdoor by nature, as well as instruction or meetings that may be considered safer outdoor. Terrence might have something to add on to the home occupation.
Yes, as Martha indicated, there's, given the COVID shutdown, and we're about to enter a year's worth of, people have certainly taken a new look at what is appropriate to be done in the home. Brentwood's regulations are fairly strict, and I'm interested in the Planning Commission and City Council's take on allowing more activities to be home occupations, potentially even allowing some client visits in a home occupation. We're seeing a lot of this happening already in our communities, and frankly, the piano lessons and the tutoring doesn't seem to be a problem we're hearing from the community, so expanding that to professional services is something that staff really wants to hear your take on, as to whether or not we ought to be a little more flexible in that regard, to allow someone to apply for a home occupation permit. Still has restrictions, but it's a little broader uses than just piano lessons and swim lessons. So that's what staff's looking for, input from the Commission and Council on this issue.
Commissioner Phippen.
Just to provide some input as requested on that. I do think that it would be a prudent idea with today's environment and the distributed workforce and the nature of business changing in such a big way that we do consider some flexibility in that regard. So I agree with you on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Ziegler.
Thank you. Not that I disagree with loosening it, but I almost foresee long-term, how do you control it? You say this is okay, and music lessons and tutoring are okay. Next there's outdoor swimming. Then what about now you've got parking issues on the street or people coming in? As an insurance professional, there comes a lot of new liabilities that come into play there. So I'm just curious. I'm not saying I disagree with it, but I think we've got to be careful on you could be going down a slippery slope. I don't know how other communities are dealing with it, but I agree. COVID's not going to be here forever, but I think businesses have changed and adapted to where I even told my own staff that we may not be going back full-time in the office. You can work from home a couple days a week. Now, they wouldn't have customers coming to their house, but I just think we've got to be very careful if we do go down this road of loosening it to an extent that, number one, how loose do we go? Who's going to control it? Do we have enough, whether it's community service or what, or city staff, to really enforce some of this? So this one I can see where it could be we've got to be very careful.
Councilmember Mike.
I think Terrence was trying to speak first.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Ziegler. And yes, the devil is in the details, and there are conditions to be placed on such permits, and that would be part of what's proposed, what is brought forward to the Commission and the Council to review in detail in the coming months.
Now,
Mayor, if I could interrupt for just a moment. Commissioner Cross is unable to raise her hand, and so I'm keeping an eye on her, and she will have her hand up as well for this item.
Now, Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you. I actually was going to say just about the same as what those commissioners said. I think it's something that we need to be looking at, especially now when so many small businesses are suffering, and we can relieve that a bit by allowing some of these things to take place in homes. I think people getting their hair done, one-on-one personal training, those kinds of things would be very appropriate for home businesses that we could allow. But I also wonder, given what Commissioner Ziegler is saying, should be something that is built around the pandemic, around shelter in place, and be reviewed again once things start to open up again, because there are a lot of concerns around noise and traffic and impact in other ways. The coming and going and the parking and all of that. I think that is something that we definitely need to look at. And I can imagine that we would be able to monitor that to the degree that would be appropriate if that many businesses were starting to take care of their work in their homes and impacting their neighbors that way. This is all to say that I do support the idea. I think it's important to try and help people keep businesses alive, but I believe that we would need to have some pretty clear expectations on both sides of what it would look like, and a way to monitor it.
Understood. And yeah, what's envisioned is a slight loosening, not a throw the doors open sort of idea. So, but your comments are well taken. Thank you.
Councilmember Mendoza.
Yeah, I just reiterate everything everyone has said, and I think there's two buckets. There's work from home. So I work from home. I've always worked from home. I don't have customers coming in and out. There's one car. Versus, running a business and having the potential of multiple cars on the street, multiple people coming in and out. I think, everything Commissioner Ziegler said and, Councilperson Meyer, everyone else is saying, that's a big concern to me, just the traffic on the streets, both cars and just people coming in and out.
Understood.
Commissioner, is there a way? Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Cross, did you have something? And then I'll go to the Vice Mayor.
I'm pretty much reiterating what we've already heard. I think from an economic development perspective, it's really important that we create a space for people who can work to be able to work from home if it requires bringing clients on. I think getting more money moving throughout the city is really, really important. But the flip side is we want to make sure that it's not impacting somebody's quality of life, whether it's music, sound, traffic, making streets unsafe for kids to play outside where they normally could have before. But I think that this is a hot topic. I think it's one that the community wants to know more about, and it is a slippery slope, right? We all want to be able to work, but we want our homes to still be our sacred spaces where our kids can play and we can be at peace, if you get that at home.
Understood.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez.
Yes, I agree with what everybody has said. Terrence, is there a way that we could get some examples of what other communities at the size of Brentwood are doing when it comes to that? People working from home kind of a thing? What type of impact have they seen, or, what other communities and what have they got? What kind of feedback would we get from them? Is that possible?
It is, and we intend to. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Terrence.
Mr.
So
Mayor?
somebody has their phone on. It's making a lot of noise on the back.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Can you make sure you're muted?
Thank Thank you. And Commissioner Roberts has her hand up.
Yeah, I do. So I guess with all that's been said, I guess my next question, if I heard correctly at the start of this presentation, that we were going to move from our input, taking that input, going back to the table, and maybe fine-tuning some of these points to consider what it is we've said. And then what is the next step from here?
The next step from here is we're going to take the input we've got, and we're also going to wait. We're going to wait a few days to give the community and the commission and council to send us emails of things that you hadn't noticed before. But once we get that comment, we're going to digest what we've heard and draft the actual ordinances in the three pieces. The administrative regulations, the use tables, and the third that I just forgot. But we'll be bringing that. We'll be drafting those and bringing that to the Planning Commission and City Council for your review. That's the next step. It'll come in 3 different pieces, and then after we've gone through it line by line, and with an indication of the changes that are required by state law and the changes that are recommended. Because I heard that loud and clear, the council and commission want to see the difference there, then we'd be bringing that to you for your review and approval, down to the detail of, height limit of the building, down to what kind of roofing material should be used. So all that detail will be brought to you for your review.
Thank you.
I like a follow-up on that, Terrence. So are you saying that we're going to eliminate our planned development, our PDs, or are we just incorporating this into our PDs?
What's envisioned is that PD still has potential in some cases to be valuable if the project proposed with the PD is a better project. However, our existing code makes PDs almost required because the code is let's just say not ideal. So the concept is to replace our existing PD with actual real zoning, which provides a lot more transparency and usability for the public, but it doesn't eliminate the potential for a future planned development if one was proposed and that the city council felt it was something worth doing. But we would expect to see many fewer planned developments. Right now, almost all commercial areas are planned developments, and we would expect that the zoning would be able to accomplish the regulations that the community envisions, not requiring PDs in most cases.
Okay, and Commissioner Ziegler.
I just one last quick question. So my understanding is you'll take feedback from tonight's meeting, any emails from ourselves, council, and the public. You're putting that together, and then it's going to be the next step is then going to be presented to planning for approval, or will we come back and talk about this one more time or one or two more times before it actually goes in for an approval process? I mean, I could see where, home occupations, as much as we might want to make decisions now, it's almost tough because we're in such unprecedented times that by the time we figure this out and get this in place, I'm picking time, multiple months from now, where are we going to be with restrictions or not as much restrictions? So that one can see where it not be as much of a priority. So first and foremost, are you saying the next process is take what you got tonight and bring it to planning for an approval next, or will we have another joint meeting like this to go through state mandates, what you came up with, what all the feedback was, put it back together so we can discuss it one more time before it then fully gets vetted to planning and the council?
That's not determined at this point. What we're envisioning is it really depends on what your comments are and and essentially also what the commission and the council upon reflection think of this process versus having a draft presented to your individual body, individual bodies for discussion. So I think we would draft the conditions, and then I think we would interface with the council members and commissioners to sort of get an idea of which approach was most comfortable for you.
Okay, thank you. I personally would like to see it kind of put together, almost make it in this similar scenario, to go through it again so we all can voice and listen to each other's ideas and thoughts before it comes to, come to fruition and to actually make final decisions on it. That's just my thoughts.
No, absolutely. And Martha, is this the last slide? Is there a wrap-up slide? No, that's a very wrap-up slide. Absolutely, and I have heard, and I apologize for the lack of time that you had to review this. I heard it very, very clearly. We will make sure that whatever document is published next, you have for at least 2 weeks before it's being reviewed, and we'll make it we'll put it on our website and make the community aware of it through social media and a press release. So you have my word that we will make sure that happens.
Can we also make a post if we're going to allow more emails from residents, just with the link to where the document lives and where they should send their comments to?
Absolutely.
And then just to follow up real quick on the interviewees, if we could get their place of employment on the final document on the last page. Like, I'm looking at the same document from San Leandro, and they had all of their places of employment. So if we could get the same information on ours, that's actually really needed. Thank you.
I also still see Commissioner Roberts' hand up. Commissioner Roberts, did you have further questions or comments? Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you. Well, if there's no more questions or comments for staff, I do want to thank Martha Miller for her presentation. Thank you, Terrence, for bringing this information to us. I do personally right now feel the same that Commissioner Ziegler did. I would like an opportunity at this point to get back together, but we'll see what you have sent out for us later. And if there's no more questions or comments, we're going to move into adjournment, first with Planning Commission and then with City Council. So could I get a motion from Planning Commission for adjournment?
So moved. Commissioner Roberts.
Second. Chairperson Hankins.
We have a first and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Chair Cross.
Aye.
Commissioner Fippen.
Aye.
Commissioner Roberts.
Aye.
Commissioner Ziegler.
Aye.
Chair Hankins.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous. The Planning Commission is adjourned.
Okay, and now motion to adjourn from City Council.
So moved.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer.
Yes.
Councilmember Rary.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez. Vice Mayor Martin.
Yes, did you hear me?
I do now, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Mayor Bryant.
Okay.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimous. The City Council is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Be safe.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.